Hello, all you golf swing nerds and 3D motion geeks out there. I am Jason Sutton, aka The Guru, where it is my job to tease out the habits, life lessons, secrets to success from some of the top performers in the teaching business and all other domains as well. This show is designed to help all of you coaches by giving you the ideas, insights, and roadmap that helped all of these top coaches get to the top of our industry. On this episode, I talked to my good friend Tyler Ferrell. Let me give you a little background on Tyler. He is the Director of Instruction at La Rincanodo Country Club in Los Gatos, California. He is ranked as one of the best young teachers under 40 in America by Golf Digest. He's the author of the book, The Stock Tour Swing, which I highly recommend for all you coaches, and we get into this conversation exclusively with. He also runs one of the best online learning platforms that I've ever seen for coaches and players alike, called thegolfsmartacademy.com, which you should definitely check out and subscribe to. He is an expert in TPI fitness and is on the advisory board for K-Motion and K-Vest, and I'm sure many others. Tyler was also one of the early adopters of AMM 3D motion capture, which we talk about in our conversation. Has he learned how to look at golf swings with 3D before he even learned how to look at them on video, and was really heavy on the fitness side early on, which is really fascinating. Let's just say that Tyler is one of the brightest minds in golf instruction today, and someone that I've had an eye on and learned so much from in the last couple of years, especially in the world of 3D and coaching. So without further delay, let's get to this wide-ranging conversation with my friend Tyler Ferrell. Enjoy. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome to the Golf Guru Show. I've been such a big fan of your work for many years, so it's great to catch up. So I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be on the show.
So let's give the listeners, before we get into all the technical details, which we're going to talk about with your teaching and 3D. As I talked to John Sinclair the other day, it's kind of like 3D week here on the show, because we've got a lot of 3D info, which I think is fascinating, and I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. Let's take the listeners back to the beginning of your career and even in your childhood, because I was thinking of, because I asked this question to everybody obviously, but I was thinking of some of the commonalities of high performers and how it's always interesting to see what kind of childhood they had and then sort of what they were into as children, because I think it has a lot to do with whether they were super curious at an early age, or did they deal with some adversity, whether it was like somebody telling them that they couldn't do something and that really motivated them. So what would you say really spurred you into the direction that you're at today?
Well, there were a few factors. Growing up, sports was a big part of my family bonding. Like a lot of weekend days were watching basketball with my dad, or I can remember going to the basketball court when I was just a toddler, and if I hit the bottom of the net with the ball, it counted. That was how young I kind of got started in that sport. So my dad growing up in Indiana, that was definitely the family sport. And I had an older brother who was I still have an older brother, but he's 3.5 years older. And, trying to keep up with him just forced me to work really hard and just put in the hours to try to get better. So I never really sat still as a kid. I was always playing and getting into something. And sports was really my top priority, even until about sophomore, junior year of college. But I had on my mom's side, they were very much into kind of the science and tech side. We grew up and watched Nova and science programming on PBS, and while I didn't really enjoy history or English class, I could get by in those classes. I was really passionate about science and kind of understanding why things worked. So combine that with sports, I was pretty aware of why I was good at certain things in sports and why I would struggle at other areas, like even in as early as like middle school and high school.
So expand
So
on that a little bit. Give us an example of sort of your, because that shows, I think, a great deal of self-awareness at such a young age.
um, yeah, I mean, I'd say more so in I was really quick and really explosive with my lower body. I knew that I wasn't quite as powerful or strong with my upper body compared to some of the other guys. So I would really just try to I would try to prolong points, even though I had the ability to go for winners more often. I would tend to go for like, let's just draw this out and let's turn it into an endurance contest because I think I can outrun them. So I would very much into this strategy. Like, with my older brother, he was older, he was taller, he was stronger, but I was quicker. So I learned early on how to take advantage in pretty much every game to take advantage of my quickness.
So basketball was a big part, and then you say tennis. And I know you mentioned transitioning from basketball to golf.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
I like I said, sports was a big part of my early upbringing, and I thought I was going to be a professional basketball player. I had a very loving family, and so I wasn't short on confidence as a kid. And I thought I was going to be a professional basketball player, and then I kind of got burned out, and people started growing past me, and it was the right time for me to make a shift to golf. And so when I started playing golf, I naturally just transposed that dream that, okay, I'm going to be a professional golfer. And it wasn't until college that I realized that those were totally different lifestyles. And really what I wanted to do was the lifestyle of a professional basketball player, not necessarily the lifestyle of a professional golfer.
So how did you view those as being different? Like, expand on that a little bit. That's
Well,
interesting.
I think, as you know, my first job was at Club Golf. One of my first mentors was Dr. Greg Rose. And at the time, we had a discussion about the difference between these two and kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And he was telling me about how, golfers would be at TPI and they would have to kick them out. I mean, they'd want to hit balls 10 hours a day, and it was like there was nothing else that they wanted to do. And I've got a lot of diverse interests, so I wasn't really excited about putting in 10 hours of practice. I like doing like 2 or 3 hours of really hard, but I didn't like spending my entire day doing one thing. I wanted to go, play other sports. And so that fits a lot more into the basketball mentality of go work it out really hard for a couple hours, then play some video games, go to the gym. Like, there were other things that you would throw into the mix.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
that was that was kind of one of the turning points when I realized, you know what, maybe I'm going to go down this coaching road and see where it goes, but I'm probably not going to be a player.
So shortly after college, then that's when you like tell us a little bit how you got into the golf teaching part, because I think your career is very fascinating because it would be how I would draw it up nowadays definitely with technology, but it's a little bit backwards compared to like how myself and a lot of coaches have learned how to teach golf.
Yeah, it was totally backwards. I didn't really have any intention of being a golf instructor. My passion was more on the fitness side and like understanding how the body worked. So when I was in college, Dr. Greg Rose opened up Club Golf, which was a golfer's gym, and he opened it up like 10 minutes from where my parents had their house. So I got a summer job and then would come home on weekends occasionally, and basically I worked at Club Golf, and through some kind of weird circumstances, they didn't have a whole lot of marketing money. So most of the members there were there because of Greg and knew of him, but it wasn't really busy the first year and a half. And so when I was my role was to keep the place clean. I was basically the janitor or the bag boy. My goal was to keep the place clean and keep the members happy. And if those two goals were taken care of, then I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. I could practice, or what I ended up doing a lot of was I shadowed Greg. So I help him, with the wires and taking them off of the 3D system back in the 3D bay, or grabbing the medicine balls for when he was going to do the power testing or whatever. I just kind of helped out. I got to shadow him for about a year and a half. And, I was a really curious person and just picked up a lot of what was going on just by being around him and observing. So I originally thought I was going to go into more of the business side, but through a kind of crazy turn of events, we got a new owner, and he put in a bunch of marketing money. We had this big open house, and our number one trainer at the time threw out his back. And so we had just signed up all these people based on what we did in the open house, and we didn't have anyone to do the evaluation. And so I threw my hand up because I had been through the training and basically volunteered to run these people through the level 1 screen, and I would be supervised by Lance Gill, who was the guy who threw out his back.
Right.
And so, I literally just one week I'm helping organize what we're going to do strategically as a business, and the next week I'm seeing clients all day long. And so I started doing the fitness stuff before I was really qualified to do it. So I had to few under an apprenticeship, and then started going through kind of the certifications and continuing ed and kind of building the skills I should have had when I started while I was doing the job. But industry by first doing the fitness programs and building the fitness programs based on 3D. I was very fortunate that Club Golf had one of the first 3D systems from it was Skill Tech at the time, but later became AMM, so Phil Cheatham's company.
Right.
So I learned to look at the golf swing on 3D graphs before I really knew how to look at it on 2D.
Yeah, that's I think that's so interesting. So it's it sort of leads us into some of the things that we want to talk about today, which is the difference between 2D and 3D, and the things that you sort of learned, I guess, backwards, if you thought about it, because most of us learn, by looking at video and then obviously looking at players and then going back to the video. What are some of the things that surprised you, or do you think, I guess, could fool coaches out there by looking at 2D that actually isn't happening, or maybe could just fake you out, I guess, a little bit based on camera angles, or maybe things that just aren't happening? What surprised you with both of those?
So I'd say a lot of the wrist stuff initially surprised me. So when I played in college, I was a very good ball striker and had a terrible short game. Not terrible short game, terrible wedge play. So I had 6 double hit chips in tournaments or qualifiers in college.
Wow.
And so my first goal was to understand why I struggled so much with wedge play. And so my first casual 3D experience was bringing over a few of my friends who I knew had good short games, put them on 3D, and then put myself on and see what the difference was. When I left Club Golf and transitioned out on my own, I got my own 3D system, and I started looking at some of the graphs that we hadn't really been trained on. Because I talked with Phil, who created the system, and realized that there was a lot more than just the 6 main graphs that were the default setting that everybody was looking at. And so it was when I was looking at some of these other graphs they're in the software that I started to see just some casual relationships. And then in digging deeper to try to understand the relationships, that's what kind of unlocked a lot of my coaching philosophy. And so some of the early stuff was, to actually answer your question, when looking at the wrists, I was surprised to see how common the left wrist pattern was regardless of grip type. So the amount of supination, the change in the amount of flexion, the radial and ulnar deviation seem to be relatively consistent in terms of their magnitudes and the timings, regardless of the grip type. So I had kind of always believed that your grip type dictated how you were going to release the club, but it didn't seem like that was the case, at least with the lead wrist graphs.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's with better players, would you say, or are you talking about just in general with all players?
No, I would say with better players.
Gotcha.
That was the other thing was because of the relationship, I was able to, whenever I'd go out to TPI, I'd just sit in the 3D bay and study graphs and just look at, what all their players were doing. Because that was kind of one of the deals with Greg's relationship with club golf, was I got to go out to TPI a couple times a year. And I had a lot of the data on amateurs from working at this golf gym. So I could see the commonalities of what tour pros were doing and compare them to the commonalities of what amateurs were doing and start trying to establish my patterns that way. So
tell me a little bit more about that. So what do you see, just talking about wrist angles, because I think obviously that's a hot topic, with teaching pros nowadays, is what were you seeing in transition and or I guess into delivery and release with the wrist angles for good players? And then obviously that's going to help us to teach the average players and the higher handicaps to do that.
One of the early things that I learned from looking at the graphs is that what the right wrist does and what the left wrist do are oftentimes totally different. So I don't want someone to think that just because the left wrist is doing one movement, the right wrist is doing its mirror. Oftentimes they're working on the club slightly differently. In general, with the left wrist, I look for a little bit of a pronation in transition. So that's one of the main shallowing movements. And there are tour pros who don't have any pronation. They go straight into supination from the top of the swing, and they tend to be a little bit steeper with their arm movements. So that's one of the big shallowing movements that very few amateurs work into their equation. If you're comparing the amount of flexion extension, typically at impact, you're going to see somewhere around 25 degrees more flexed. So if you start with a really extended position or a really strong grip, oftentimes they won't get all the way to flat, but sometimes they do. And if you start with a weak grip, they will be significantly bowed at impact, but the total range changes about the same. I think that has to do with how they control the club face to account for lag or shaft lean, and how they control low point. Then as far as radial and ulnar, I look for it's the maximum ulnar deviation as late as possible after impact. It's usually not too far after impact for the left wrist. It's usually later for the right wrist. In good player patterns, they have kind of a look of really good arm extension on the way through. But the one that was interesting to me was there are a lot of really good ball strikers and really long hitters who don't load like their wrist radially in the downswing at all. So on the graph, it'll show up as a slight unhinging the entire downswing, but it doesn't look like a cast. So that was one of my early understandings of power generation, was basically getting out of the idea that radial and ulnar deviation is the key to a cast pattern. For me, cast pattern is all trail arm.
So it's more the trail arm straightening rather than the wrist doing more of that look on 2D video, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I look at it more of either an early flexing of the trail wrist or an early straightening of the trail elbow. Um, on 2D, I look for it's moving, but nobody has really good shoulder or shoulder blade data yet. So hopefully someday we'll be able to back up what I see visually, or tell me that it's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's coming. It sounds like with Dr. Kwan and somebody's doing that, I think.
Well, I was talking with Sasha McKenzie about it, and when I asked him, like, when are we going to get shoulder data, he said shoulder data is really messy. It's it's like there's a couple of things that are quite tricky in terms of trying to actually write the code for, and the that you like the order that you decide to get the numbers matter. So like if you're that might get more technical than some of your listeners want to really understand, but basically
No, go for it,
like
man. This is what it's about.
if it's moving in 3D space, like let's say in order to get the amount of side bend, you have to factor in the rotation and the bend. You would get a different amount of side bend if you calculated the bend first, then the rotation, versus if you did the rotation first, then the bend.
Got it.
So, so like when you look at the shoulder and it's got it crosses a lot of joints. It's got it's pretty much got the greatest amount of movement of any of the ball and sockets. There's some reflexive movements that happen. So like you will always get an automatic internal and external shoulder rotation whenever you have abduction or adduction. So if the shoulder is moving away from you, it's rotating, even if you're not trying to rotate it.
Gotcha.
So like for reasons like that, the math becomes pretty tricky.
Yeah, I could see that because it just moves in so many different directions that it's
Yeah.
difficult. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I've learned just talking to guys like you and John, and the difference between the thorax, or what I call the torso, and the shoulders. Because I mean, sometimes we get caught up looking at that 2D video, and we think the shoulders are doing something which really the thorax or the torso is really doing. I mean, what's the difference? Because I know we'll get into this as far as transition. There's got to be some differences in where the thorax is and where the shoulders are moving, especially when we're heading down to impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, so this year I'm speaking at the World Golf Fitness Summit on like the shoulders effect of the release compared to the wrist, because oftentimes we attribute most of a good quality release to having good hands and good wrists. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how the shoulders influence what the wrists are doing, or why I think that the shoulders might be a better indicator of the skill of the golfer than just looking at the wrist and the hands. But yes, the shoulder is 10 joints, 5 on each side, and they work like harmoniously together. So if you move one part of it, all 5 of those joints change a little bit. So like when you look at, okay, there's one thing to look at how the body is moving, but then when you want to try to change it, when you want to influence it, you have to understand how each movement relates to the segments around it. So like understanding how the spine and the shoulders relate to each other can really give you a leg up in understanding what a golfer is trying to do. So is he doing that movement to apply more force, or is he doing it to apply some club face control? It gives you a little bit better guesses when you understand how the shoulder and the spine work.
So how can you tell a difference in that? Is there any key elements to look for on video, or just watching a player?
Yeah, so the shoulder blade is actually like the big boss of the shoulder. Like it kind of drives a lot of the shoulder movements. So looking at how the shoulder blades are moving is probably more relevant than looking at how the shoulder appears to be rotating. And the shoulder blade movements will relate to the spine. So basically, if your shoulder blade moves towards the spine, your spine will go into a little bit more extension, and the arm will go into external rotation.
Right.
That's like one of the simple patterns. And then if you went the opposite, if the shoulder blade moves away from the spine, the shoulder is going to go into more internal rotation, and the spine is going to go into more flexion.
Ah, that's really good. That's good. That's a really good visual
So,
too.
so like one of the when you understand some of these connections and relationships, it gives you a little better guess at what's going on. So one of the areas that I'll look at is oftentimes we see a golfer who's stalling and going more arms, kind of a stall flip pattern, right?
Right.
Well, the two main drivers of the shoulder, the pec and the lat, both connect to the pelvis. So if you're using more of the shoulder musculature to create more of the force and fling the club out there, then your brain is going to tighten the chain between the shoulders and the pelvis, and so your pelvis is going to stop. So like it becomes a game of where is this person creating the force and are they using to control where it's swinging.
That's really good. So when you're teaching, and I wanted to get, I'm jumping around here a little bit, so bear with me. I got a plan here, I promise. But I really enjoyed your book, The Stock Tour Swing, because I think it does a great job of sort of hitting all of these elements, especially with the body and the club, and I really like your framework, which is, number one, what do I want to do with the club? And then two, what do I need to do with the body to perform that task? And then how do I train it? So what would you say, do you use a lot of 3D, or I'd say how much 3D do you use in your students' lessons right now? Or is it sort of like capturing that data first and then building a program after that and then maybe testing them later? Because I know it's difficult to use 3D a lot because of the time.
Yeah, I've gone through different kind of phases in my career with 3D. There were times where I did it like I would not work with a student unless I did a 3D. But where I'm at now, I'm working a lot more with kind of your 10 to 20 handicap, kind of your more average golfer. So I've looked at so many 3Ds that I'm reasonable as far as being able to imagine what the graphs would look like. And it's really, I'll recommend a 3D if I feel like we get stuck, or if I feel like they need more, like they need a clear visual as far as what I'm actually going after. But for the most part, I'd say I don't use 3D that much right now. Because of the how much time it takes to set up the AMM, and I'm at the point, like a lot of my golfers are, so we can hit the ball more solidly, and a lot of that comes down to some more skill building and some of the key arm movements. And honestly, the 3D, especially for looking at the trail arm, isn't there's too many factors to get a really clear plan just from looking at that one graph. So what I like to do is more heading into the off season with my lower handicap and kind of my more serious golfers. That's when I'll do a 3D to kind of game plan what we want to work on, both in the gym and on the range in the off season.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because I mean we're starting to dive into, we use 4D a little bit at the academy, which is a little quicker. Mm-hmm. I know AMM takes a lot more time to set up or whatnot, but and it's getting quicker, I think, based with your help and John Sinclair and these guys that really know a lot about the 3D, and I think that's really good. So after reading your book, like I said, I really enjoyed it. I think it's going to be a timeless classic. I'm gonna call it right now on the show.
Wow.
Because it does hit that sort of, as I told you last time we were talking, you sort of walk that tightrope of helping players, but also helping coaches gain information and really, things they can use with their students. And also, I enjoyed watching some of your videos that I've subscribed to, and we talked a lot last time about Tommy Fleetwood's swing and how we enjoyed that move, and looking at the trail arm. I think and something that all the listeners out there know that I've been a little bit obsessed with lately. We did a sort of a quasi 2D research project with my staff, and we came to the conclusion that the timing of when the trail arm straightens had a big effect on their performance, we took the top 5 drivers and the worst 5 drivers. And so talk a little bit about what you found with the trail arm movements, and is there any truth to my crappy 2D research project?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that no, that the timing is not necessarily as significant as more the direction. So like if you're extending the arm, but it's also externally rotating as you're extending it, it's going to appear on video that it's staying bent longer than if you were straightening the arm but going into internal rotation.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point.
What I imagine is that the speed of the straightening might be a little bit slower in the top 5 drivers.
That's correct.
But it would. I'm guessing that the timing would be still pretty consistent. I don't know. I can. If you send me the names, I can look in my database and see if I can give you some actual numbers on that. But I do think that coaching, how the arms work has a huge effect on different skills. And I do think that the driver is more of a total body movement. And so if you're down regulating how much you're using your arms for power, you're probably giving yourself a better chance to hit the driver straight. And if you are swinging your wedges too much with your lower body and legs, then upregulating and trying to get a little bit more arm action is probably a good thing. So what I'm guessing is that those bottom 5 drivers are also some of the better wedge players, and that's how they keep their card.
That's 100% correct. Yeah, we targeted Phil Mickelson and Luke Donald as 2 of the worst drivers in total driving, and again, fantastic players. But everybody does it a little differently, or gets it done a little differently. Those guys have made gazillion dollars out there, but they were obviously good wedge players, but poor drivers of the golf ball. And then we had like DJ, like Tommy Fleetwood. I can't remember, a couple other guys at the top were definitely appeared to have, more bend in their trail arm at impact, maybe a touch more open with their thorax or torso at impact, which seems to have, so sequencing seemed to be a big factor in that. Is there anything that you could add to that?
Yeah, I'll one of my passions with the wrist graphs is looking at the supination and the timing and the range of motion. And I can tell you that both Phil Mickelson and Luke Donald have significantly, let's say about 20 degrees less supination at the end of their release than someone like a Henrik Stenson, who appears to have more of a hold-off style to their release.
Yes.
And that's where like what the shoulder does and what the forearms do can cause you to like misname or misdescribe what's actually happening in the golf swing.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us to that rate of closure taboo, right? So
yeah,
we talked a little bit, and I talked with John about it as well, as we know, and he's big on, and you guys have, I know, similar databases. So I mean, I know you've got a lot of the information of, the different rates of closure and how you, and I know there's not a great way to actually, I guess, measure it, I guess, unless you have Enzo in your place. But talk a little bit about that, because I mean he's got some interesting concepts with the look of the release and
Yeah.
how much rate of closure we can predict.
Yeah. I've done a couple of videos on the site talking about rate of closure. And one of the things that I try to pass on, especially to coaches, is that, okay, you're looking at it from a three-dimensional point of view. So when you stop a club in the follow through and you look at it at a specific angle and you get another person at that same, let's say roughly that same angle, well, if one club is further away than the other club, that one that's further away had a slower rate of closure to get there, even though it's at the same frame and the same time. So a better indicator if you're going to look at rate of closure is like the couple frames before impact, or I'd like to look at roughly where the club is pointing when it's even with the right foot.
Gotcha.
That gives you a much better indicator visually as far as what the rate of closure might be. Now, the other thing is we attribute the consistency of ball striking to a lower rate of closure, but I'd be willing to bet that if you factored everything in, it's actually the arc width and the timing of when they reach their width in the swing that has a bigger impact on their consistency than the actual number associated with the rate of closure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're referring to
creating
the bigger flat spot. Is that what you're saying?
Creating a bigger flat spot, creating a later arc width.
Gotcha.
I don't find golfers who break the pattern of the later and the longer the arc width, the more consistent they tend to be, and the sharper and the more the arc width peaks right at impact, typically the more they complain about face control, regardless of the rate of closure speed.
Gotcha. Yeah, that
and
makes
what
a lot
I think
of sense.
One of the looks that gives that width in the follow through and less of the rehinging and kind of what looks like a little bit later or slower rate of closure is really a better arc width pattern.
So does that have anything to do with transition, like sequence?
Transition and the release absolutely play off of each other. So yeah, what you do in transition will set you up or make it harder to do what you want to do, like what you plan to do in the release. But where I go with that is I know a lot of golfers equate the idea of rolling that left forearm over or supinating as like a rate of closure nightmare. But because of the way the bones are in your forearm, your radius is sticks out a little bit further than your ulna, or your thumb bone sticks out a little bit further than the pinky bone of your wrist. And so when you supinate, you actually keep the club moving away from your body longer. So I think that the supination allows for a better flat spot and arc width pattern.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I don't want it to necessarily be super active. I don't want it to be a really active pattern. But I think if you're holding off supination, you're limiting some of the key skills for consistency, especially with the driver.
Gotcha. Yeah. So go back. Let's talk about transition a little bit, and I think it goes back to your thoughts on wrist angles as well. And this is another thing that I've just been interested in. Goes a little bit with the forces and torques. Is when we're starting into transition, and I'm talking about average golfers that tend to move the hand path out too quickly. Shaft steepens. It's easy to say, hey, keep your hands back, keep your arms passive and just teach them how to pivot, and thinking that's going to actually shallow the club. And I'm just not seeing that with players, again, club players that don't have that skill. So, there just has to be some type of force being applied to the handle moving downwards, I think, in a conscious effort, and to really get that feeling of what the hands, arms, wrist angles, and so forth have to do, and then marrying that with the body. Do you find that at all?
I was with you until you said the force from the hands going downward.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
So here's the challenging it's kind of complicated trying to resolve all the different data sets, right? Like trying to combine the 3D data and the forces and torques and what we see on video and kind of making sense of and how the body works best. And to combine all that and try to make sense of it all is a little bit tricky. So I'll tell you that a lot of the guys who have the appearance of a body powered swing, the the left shoulder on 3D is actually elevating in transition. So the left shoulder is not coming like the arm is going up towards the chin, not down towards the ground.
Okay, I'm with you.
Um, so I think that if you were going to pull down with the hands and arms, you would use your lat and your tricep, and that shoulder would come down first.
Okay.
But I think that when you shift weight and start regaining your flex, you may feel like you're pulling down on the handle, but it would be coming more from what the body is doing than it would come from the arms and hands. I mean, you have limited options as far as the arms and hands pulling down.
Gotcha. Yeah,
right? You've pretty much got.
And obviously, there's some right side bend involved there too, right? When you're talking about the left shoulder going up and not around, there's got to be some right side crunching going on.
A lot of those body-driven guys are still going into left bend as the club changes direction. So they haven't started going into right side bend yet.
Gotcha.
Some do. That's not a universal pattern, but a lot of them don't. So it gets back to what forces and torques, which might be what does a golfer feel, and then the 3D, which might be what do we see. One of the things that I learned from my background in fitness is that the old phrase "telling ain't teaching and listening ain't learning."
I like that.
I don't think we need to come up with the perfect explanation. What you need is a Rolodex of exercises or drills that get people to feel the two different ways they could do it, and then help them use the feel that was the correct way. So oftentimes I'll take them up to transition and I'll push on their arms and hands in different ways to try to stimulate different areas of their body. So I'll do one that stimulates the shoulders. I'll do one that stimulates the arms. I'll do one that stimulates more the legs and the core. And I'll just ask, like, which one feels more like your transition? Oh, it feels like the arm one? Okay, we want to change that. And I got that from my fitness background, because I can remember working with a guy and just trying to do like a simple lat pull down. And it took us like 10 minutes of, cueing and palpating and feeling in order to get him to change how it was doing. So like, I'm a big believer that just because I tell you the correct way to do it doesn't mean that I've communicated the message. It's not until you can show me what I meant that I know that I communicated my message.
Yeah, I think that's 100%. I agree with that, because I mean, I'm big on moving people around and not saying much, and then kind of letting them verbalize what they feel. Yeah. And we've been using with the help of Mr. Sinclair, talking about the hands and using the orange whip of getting people to kind of go, all right, yeah, that's what I feel. That's the wrong way to do it. So let's create another feel. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So so tell us, because I know you've got so many, I'm watching your videos and talking to you. I know you've got a lot of exercises or drills that you use with different training aids or bands to train that sort of shallowing transition move, and or the right arm working properly. Do you have a couple of those?
Yeah, I mean, in my lessons, I am the band. I mean, I put my hands on, like you said, and I'll ask people to move, and I try to just use my hands to kind of listen to the direction and the way, what muscles they're using and all that stuff. So in my lessons, I will try to feel it myself, but then I want to give them ways that they can reinforce it, and that's where the band bands come in. So whether it's using some bands to work on sequencing, or to provide a little bit, like all the band does is it heightens the activation at one area of your body. And so oftentimes if you're unaware when there's really low activation, it's easier to pay attention to when there's high. So that's what I think a good drill does, is it just turns up the awareness of one specific part of the movement. And one of my mentors instilled the phrase, if you want to master a movement, then you have to master all parts of the movement. So if you wanted to master a squat, you need your ankle to work right, your knee, your hip, your pelvis, your spine, your shoulders. You need everything involved in that movement to work as well as it can. And so when I look at a golf swing, I'm kind of looking at each of those links from the ground to the club and just trying to come up with drills to heighten the ability to dial in one specific part at a time.
Yeah, that's really good. So I want to give some advice to the young coaches out there. And I think, again, going back to your book, I sort of read books a little bit differently nowadays, as I'll start at the back and then I'll move to the middle and see, I sort of skip around a lot. But I really enjoyed the last page of your book. And I want to get your comment on sort of how long this took, because this, as a young coach, I think we always try to, like, we're really involved with getting people better very quickly and then not understanding the learning process. So I'm going to read this from your book, and then I'm going to expand on it a little bit. With years of coaching, I've learned to let the golfer get bored with success before I suggest a new area of focus. If the student asks for more, that's one thing. But if they are content at a certain skill level, it's a disservice to shift them to something new unless it will absolutely help quickly. My minimum time working in one area is 3 weeks. So, and then all the other thing that I'll piggyback on that you said at the bottom, the other key skill is to recognize frustration level. If the student gets highly frustrated, focus their attention on club brushing the ground or reacting to feedback. And I think that's what you do a really good job of, is getting feedback from the student and then being able to sort of guide them in the proper direction. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I think that's a fantastic style. And then also piggyback that with, what advice would you give a young PGM student or a young coach that's trying to get better at teaching?
It was really one or two students in Denver who kind of helped me learn, because they were coming in pretty consistently. One gentleman in particular, I can remember we made some really good success his first year going after like early extension and pretty much working mostly on that for a year. And then, I had been doing some cool stuff in 3D and really going after all these different pieces. And he came back for that second year, and like the first 6 weeks or so, it was like each lesson I pivoted a little bit to a complementary skill. So, well, he came back after a little of that and he was like, Tyler, I feel like you're jumping all over the place, because he wasn't making the connection that I was in my mind of like, oh, well, I wanted to work on your arms, but when you do your arms perfectly, you're hitting it fat because of what you're doing with your feet. So instead, what I started to do was kind of, I'll ask, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how overwhelmed are you with what we're doing right now? Do you think we could add more? And if they're somewhere 5, 6, or if they're like, no, this takes a lot of focus, then there's no way I'm adding a new piece. I might add like a little visual feedback, like put a pool noodle or a water bottle or something in the way to make them do it a little bit better, but I won't make them aware of any other area of their body while they're working on that one piece. And so that was something that it took me a couple of years to learn, that I would pass on to young coaches, is yes, you gotta take temperature with your students more often than not and figure out where they are in the learning process, and if they're getting it, and not just based on how solidly they're hitting the ball, but based on their understanding of what's going on. And the second key piece to that is which I learned from kind of the fitness side, which I had kind of ignored when I was, jumping all over the place with these lessons, is, with the fitness side, we know that, okay, to grow muscle fibers, it takes like 3 weeks minimum, right? So the initial benefit to a new exercise, you'll get stronger quickly, but that's purely from just better motor activation, right? So that's basically better brain activation. The muscle hasn't grown because it hasn't had time for you to get stronger. So when you see a client and they can only lift 10 pounds and the next week they can do 15, it wasn't because they got stronger. It was because they could activate a higher percentage of the motor units, and they're more coordinated in that pattern now. Well, so that means that in order for them to actually grow that pattern, I need them to put in a minimum of 3 weeks in order to stimulate the tissue enough to get it to grow bigger and stronger. So what the parallel to the golf swing is, if you move on too quickly, like let's say you're working on low point control and the club brushing the ground. If you move on too quickly, then they haven't had a time to really develop that pattern, and it's more fragile and more likely to break. And the problem is they might have some really good initial success when you move on to another skill, but you're more likely that then if they struggle, because they now had two fragile skills instead of one really good skill and one fragile skill, they get lost as far as what to go back to. And so I found that golfers would get more frustrated if they had more of these pieces to manage instead of really dialing in one at a time. So in my current lessons, like if I'm concerned that they think I'm moving on to something new, but I'm really just clarifying how I want them doing the current thing we're working on, I will explicitly say, this is not different than what we did last week. It's just refining your understanding of it.
Yeah, that's got to ease their mind a little bit as well, to think that you're not giving them something extra.
Yeah. And so, like we spoke the other day, and I talked about like, okay, so what you can do in the meantime is you can work on skill building. You can work on shot shaping or precision, or being able to do the same skill with multiple clubs back to back. And it's still challenging and fun for them, but they still stay focused on the same piece or the same skill for long enough to really solidify it.
Yeah, so describe that drill that we talked about. I think it was the trajectory and shot shape drill. I thought that was really good.
The face control mastery.
Yes.
Yeah. So only advanced players I add trajectory to it, but basically I'll have them pick a ball flight. So be like, all right, what do you want to play? And let's say they want to hit a draw. So then I will have them hit 3 shots, and they have to have 3 different amounts of draw. So they have to hit a little draw, medium draw, big draw. And they have to do that 3 balls in a row. That might take them, 20 balls to get, or it might take them 3. After they've done that, they go on to level 2, which is they now want to pick the same amount of draw, but they have to hit it at 3 different targets. So now I want to challenge them a little bit that they're not just running a program that's comfortable because they haven't changed alignment in 10 minutes. I want them going, through the process of having to pick a spot and control start line and curve that way. Then after they've done that, I want them to do 3 identical shots, the same amount of curve, finishing at the same target with the same start line. So it forces them to really get aware of start line and curve, and you can use that as more of a preparation for playing while they're working on a variety of different skills. But what it really gives them is a feeling of understanding how to control the club face and understanding where curve comes from.
Yeah, I would say that's, I use the TrackMan Combine as you do for tournament prep. That has to be a really good exercise to give them confidence that they've got control of their golf ball.
Yeah, exactly. And the little piece I forgot, if it curves the wrong way, so let's say you're hitting a draw and it fades, game over, you have to start over.
Ah,
So like
that's a pressure.
especially for good players, you know, that's one of the fastest ways to make double is the when it curves the wrong way.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's really really good. So, sort of, continuing with the advice to young coaches. So, what are, and we'll get into some of your mentors because I think that's really fascinating too. Is some of the people that have influenced your career. I know Dr. Greg Rose is a big one. Talk a little bit about your mentors and then how you have used uh, those people to, I guess, mold your career and your education.
Well, yeah, I'd say my first advice to younger pros is to find mentors. You
Yes.
know, and not everyone's gonna be open to that, but there's no harm in asking. They'll be honored that you said, you know, and it's just as simple as like, hey, you know, I'm at a place in my career where I have a number of questions. Would you mind if I just, you know, won't be all the time, but if I occasionally send you an email just asking your advice, that usually is good enough. Or what I did was you can hire someone to coach you, and then you learn a lot about what they do process wise by hiring them. So that was one of my other big mentors was Janet Alexander, and I had a neck injury, still kind of working through the last bits of it, but she helped me a lot with the first couple of years working through gaining better control and just getting out of the pain pattern. And she taught me a lot about sneaking up on like problem areas. So, you know, I had this basically like ticking time bomb in my neck where basically like if I did too much and moved too much the wrong way, like it would set off a whole bunch of symptoms. And so a lot of exercises, we had to do some exercises to try and improve the area and strengthen it. But if you went too directly at it, it would create this whole stress response and things would get worse. So she taught me a lot about how you could strengthen the area but stay under the radar of the brain and basically like trick it into thinking you're working on something else while you're strengthening that area. And so I've used that philosophy of kind of sneaking up on change of, you mentioned like, you'll notice golfers' frustration level. So if they're really frustrated or really anxious at one part of the swing, then sometimes sneaking up on a change at that part of the swing is a lot easier at it directly. And I learned that 100% from my mentor, Janet Alexander. The funny thing is I've had more mentors in the fitness world than I have in the golf world. The golf world has just been kind of where I apply my understanding of how the body moves and what I want to see forces and torques and 3D graph wise or launch monitor wise or whatever. So I feel like fitness is more complicated than the golf swing. And if you can do it, if you understand how to do it for fitness training, then the golf swing is just a subset. It's a little bit easier. Now, as far as you know, those young coaches and what they need, I am, you know, you keep plugging my book, and I appreciate that. I'm working on my own kind of coaching certification because I don't know that there's one place that kind of combines the 3D, the forces, anatomy, physiology, you know, the launch monitor, like helping you turn it into kind of one whole coaching plan. So I figured I'd at least take a crack at it and try to put together a program that would help coaches coach golfers better. So hopefully that will be, well, not hopefully, but that will be launching later in the fall.
Yeah, that's much needed. And I think that sort of leads us into that. I think the question about just how you came up with the book ideas of sort of balancing that teacher information versus student information. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I teach comes from the questions my students ask, and students are at least a lot of the diehard students are pretty smart, and they've been studying this stuff too. So they ask pretty good questions and get me to to look at connections or correlations that I might not have understood. Um, so whether for me, it's not really too different working with a coach versus working with a player. The main difference is if I'm working with a coach, I have to make sure that they understand the process of how I got to my answer. Where if I'm working with a player, they just have to know the answer and how it influences them. So the phrase that I always go back to is I wish that golf instructors, when they write articles or books or whatever, would show their work. Right? I'm prepared to show all the graphs that influence why I coach the way that I do, because for me, this is my best guess based on all this data that I've looked at. But if you don't have the data to support it, there are many golfers who will have a hard time buying into what you tell them. I think when you get golfers to understand what's happening, hopefully in a simple way, but if you get them to really understand the cause and effect, it's much easier for them to stay committed if it gets challenging.
Totally agree. I mean, I think that's really good, because it sort of leads me into the question that we discussed last time, which was the anatomical, correct information. I mean, I think we underestimate our students and their ability to understand some of the language that we use. And what I love also about your book and about your teaching is how you attach the metaphors that sort of associate with the different verbiage that we use, like flexion, extension. So talk a little bit about the couple of metaphors that are your favorite.
Yeah, I completely agree on the as far as the terminology thing. For most golfers, they don't know cupped versus arched of the wrist any more than they know flexion extension. So
yes,
what I'll usually ask, if I teach them a new movement, I'll ask them what it feels like, and then I'll prescribe or I'll give them all right, here's the technical term. Here's what some people call it. What would you prefer? And some will say, no, I like extension. That feels like extension. Or they'll say, yeah, that feels like cupping. The hardest thing is just keeping track of who likes the right term and who likes the cupping term, but you can get past that pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
As far as metaphors, I like to think that tempos and rhythms and those the sequence feelings are really good at communicating the sequence and the flow and the rates of different parts of the body working through the swing. So for example, I was working with a student this past weekend, and we were trying to get more lower body activation through the release, right? He kind of had a little bit of a late knee buckle, right? And so we worked through a few things, and I told him I wanted him to use his legs, and we did a couple things. It wasn't until I said, okay, look, I want you to use your legs, but I only want you to push about as hard as you would when you're jogging. So I had him run and take a few steps. I'm like, you feel how hard your leg is pushing against the ground? Yeah, okay. And I'd say, I want you to start pushing here, and then you're going to finish pushing when the club is here. And by getting him to know how much and the time, he was able to coordinate a whole bunch of things that he had been struggling with by trying to break down the individual pieces. And it really turned into, he was just trying to push too hard. And so by pushing too hard, the core couldn't do what it needed to do, and so the club got out of position, and then his brain would flip over and try to correct everything. But if you give golfers the beginning of the movement and the end of the movement, I think it's much easier for them to fill in the gap in the middle, as opposed to talking too intently on one specific thing in the middle of a movement.
Yeah, I love the ones that I've stole from you is the motorcycle, the lead wrist flexion coming in the transition, and then the Jackson 5. So how did you come up with those? So
all those are motorcycle was a Greg Rose thing. Jackson 5, the wipe, the left crunch, most of them come from students.
Yeah, listening to what they say, right?
Yeah, when they say this is what it feels like to me, I write those down, because that by creating kind of a creative language, it makes it easier. The cool thing is, I was talking with one of my students out here. I've been at this club now for a little over a year, and guys will use that terminology. So like, if you're playing with someone like, oh, are you working on the motorcycle move too? I'm working on my Jackson 5 or a little bit better hip bump. Like
Yeah.
they're using the same language, talking to each other. And hopefully it's communicating some pretty complicated stuff, but they're able to buy into it because it's got a nice, easy marketing word.
Yeah, I love that. So, all right, so let's get into a couple of the rapid fire questions here, and then we'll wrap up. I appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. So, describe a failure, because we know that our careers, everybody looks at us and say, "Well, you're successful," but it hasn't been all rainbows and unicorns. So, describe a failure and apparent failure that has set you up for later success.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of fail forward fast. So with most of the things that I've tried to do, it was my second, or more likely my third or fourth iteration that worked out. So whether it's like the golf website, I'm very pleased with how it's come out now, and how the book, which is a complement to the website, like all that stuff is great. Well, my very first idea for a golf training website was my junior project in college. And then, and that was, I didn't actually follow through on that, but it was going to be just a platform for golf instructors to find students and vice versa. I co-wrote my first golf like online program with D Tidwell, and it did okay, but it wasn't great. But it got me. I shouldn't say it was kind of limited. It was a little bit more of a single product internet marketing style, where it gave me the exposure of learning, well, how do you create a product? How do you market it online? Where are the possible pitfalls? So then when we did the website, so when I say we, that first golf fitness program that we did, I met my eventual business partner on the golf fitness website, or sorry, on the for Golf Smart Academy. So like, it was a failure in that it didn't do great. I mean, we sold a few thousand copies, but it didn't do great. But it led to the tools and a better philosophy for then building this current website. And so this current website, I think, it's turned into a really cool method for communicating with golfers all over the world. It's turned in some really great opportunities and experiences, and it's something that I'm constantly proud of, because it seems to be filling a need in golf instruction.
Yeah, I agree. It's Golf Smart Academy, right? That's what it's called.
Golf Smart Academy.
Right, and I'm impressed. What really is most impressive is it's like half teachers, right? So so you're providing a service to golfers, but also educating teachers.
Yeah. I'd say, I don't know what the breakdown is right now, because I haven't checked in a number of months, but even at the end of last year, we were probably about 50-50 coaches to students.
That's awesome.
And so that's part of why my information is a little bit more technical, is because coaches need and want that technical answer. Yes. They're not gonna, they don't want just tell them to swing out to right field. They want to know like all the different components of what actually gets that feeling of swinging out to right field.
Do you ever get labeled as a technical coach? Like at my club, a lot of times people that haven't spent time with me, like I go, well, what do you think? Why do you think so-and-so is not taking lessons? He thinks you're too technical. I'm like, has he ever like watched me give a lesson? Like, it's so non-technical in a lot of ways just because I use technology. Has that happened to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. what, so there are two specific students that I can think of who actually like struggle a little bit in lessons. So I don't see them very much for lessons, but they love the content in the book and on the website. And so they're playing better with my information, but it's better for them to get it that way than for me to deliver it to them directly.
That's great. Hey,
I'm not sure if I should be, proud or take that as a learning opportunity.
as long as
But
they're getting it, I
no,
guess.
yeah, I mean, I've had enough. I had a few brave ladies who gave me a chance, and that helped me get away from the super technical. But yeah, I mean, if you don't know me and you jump on some of my videos to do a little background check, if you pick the wrong one, you could easily think I'm too technical.
So
My background in basketball and tennis, because of my background in basketball and tennis, I always try to think of, how can I turn this into a playing feel and something that a student, that will hold up on the golf course, that can turn into something athletic. I don't want them just to be able to speak it better. I want them to actually be able to own it and demonstrate it.
so when you were learning tennis and learning basketball, did you take lessons,
Uh-huh.
or did you feel like you were technical in like the mechanics of a jump shot or a forehand or a serve?
A bit. So, my parents were definitely not super wealthy or anything, so I didn't take formal lessons. But my brother went away to basketball camp, and then when he came back, he taught me everything he learned. So I would go do the drills and like get it secondhand knowledge. Or my friend Kenny went to basketball camp, and he came back with like some tools and ideas. And I had a little bit more instruction on tennis, but I'd say my brother was my biggest source for um, figuring some of that stuff out. And it was really more like almost like the new buzz of like constraint led, where it was like, oh, here's what you need to do, and then I just went out and tried to figure it out until it worked.
Self discovery. That's
Self
good.
discovery.
Yeah.
So I like to, yeah, I like to give some of those, but no, I was definitely technical, but I also um, I also had the experience of kind of feeling what it was like to be in the zone, to know that you had to also your own way to perform. And so I think that's a very important skill for playing good golf as well.
Yeah, 100%. So what? Because I know you're very well read, and that's something we have in common. What book or books have you recommended the most? And it can be golf or life skills or personal development.
Uh, that's a good question. Yeah. I think that on the personal development side, possibly the People Code is up there. It's one of my favorite kind of starting points for understanding personality and motives. Um, that one was really good. Um, Overcoming Under Earning was a book that I passed on a lot in probably 10 years ago. But the simple message is basically, if you want to be successful, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And it just kind of provides a lot of stories and background as to why.
I like that. You know the author of that? I'll look it up and I'll
I can't,
hook it up
yeah,
in the
I
show
can't
notes. That's fine.
remember
I'll
off the
hook
top
it
of
up.
my head.
Nope, no problem. I love that.
Yeah.
Because body language, and that's one of the things we talked about last time too.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
IQ versus EQ. I think the balance is so important and something you're really good at.
Yeah, definitely read a couple books on body language, like trying to understand personality type and things like that. The What Everybody Knows, it was written by some FBI former whatever. It gives a bunch of kind of decent philosophies as far as reading body language, because you have to be able to tell when you're pushing too much and when you need to push a little bit harder.
Yes,
Right. And that comes a lot more from body language than just the words that your students use.
for sure. So when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, the stress of being a golf professional, what do you do?
The my biggest methods for recharging, I do a lot of fitness and try to eat healthy. Like that helps me a ton. I will, if I'm really overwhelmed, I'll try to go to bed like before 10 o'clock for a couple nights in a row, like kind of recharge that way. I do some sauna work, which will help with getting fuller sleep or getting deeper sleep. So I'll do that for a couple days. But the thing that keeps me the most kind of recharged is going away to classes. So I try to go to seminars at least five. I mean, last year I think I went to like 10 or so weekend seminars, but I'll try to go to at least half a dozen a year, just to kind of be around people who are equally curious and involved in the same topics or invested in the same topics. That really gets me coming back thinking about different ways to organize and stuff like that. So those, and they're usually a pretty nice area, so that serves as a double recharge for me.
Yeah, I like that. That's something that I love to do too. Just, I mean, having these conversations just kind of get you fired up to learn something, have an open mind, and try something different. So that leads us into the last question, which is, if you had to get one message to the world via, I always call it the metaphorical billboard. If you had to put a message on a billboard, or a couple of quotes or messages, what would it be?
Yeah, I've got a number of different kind of quotes and philosophies that I live by. I'm not quite sure any of them would make on billboards, but one that I've gone by is to always be more curious than afraid. It came out of a Buddhist book that I read probably in my early 20s. And I think it's a great a trait that good athletes have. I remember hearing Kobe Bryant going to play 5 minutes on just a terrible knee injury. He knew he wasn't going to be functional, but he wanted to see how it would feel, and so that he would know if he had to do that in the playoffs that he could do it. So like having just a curiosity more so than a fear helps you take some of the chances that I think ultimately pay off, because you never quite know when they're going to pay off. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people fail to try and make a living at something that they're truly passionate in. And I think that that's a big risk to take. So one of the phrases that a tour pro I talked with passed on to me was, find what you love and let it kill you. So figure out what it is that you're absolutely passionate about, and then figure out a way to make that a big part of your life, and you'll probably be happy.
That's great advice. That's really good. I like that. So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would want to leave with the audience? Anything that you would want to share with everybody?
Not necessarily. I would just say when it comes to golf instruction, hopefully you have a lot of young coaches paying attention. I'm sure that you can get a lot of likes with, kind of more of the attacking style of posts, but we're still in some of the infancy with understanding what's going on in the golf swing. So I just challenge people to present it more as like, okay, here's what I think and here's why I think it, and then you decide what you want. But you'll never please anyone. I've learned not to debate the golf swing online, just because most of the issues come down to more semantics or perspective or terminology.
Yes.
And it's just a waste of time to try to convince someone that the words that they're using are wrong. It's just much better to put your message out there and hope that other people resonate with it. So I've tried to do that. I've tried to stay away from philosophies. and really I just try to present my case. Here's what I see. Here's how I think you should. Here's what the club does. Here's how the body does it. Here's how I think you should train it, and let me know if it works for you.
We long for a more civil way to debate golf instruction online, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Let everybody know sort of how they can find you and say thank you. Give us your website and also your social media platform handles.
Yeah. So the website is golfsmartacademy.com, and I get all the emails or they're passed on to me if they're directed towards me. You can send emails to support@golfsmartacademy, or we're continuing to grow our YouTube channel, which is just YouTube/golfsmartacademy. We don't do a ton of Instagram or Facebook or anything like that right now, but hopefully we'll pick those up sometime. But YouTube and the main site have been very good to me for the last couple of years. So please subscribe and check out my stuff.
And go buy the book. So tell them where they can find the book.
Yes, the book is on Amazon. It's we've sold over 1,000 copies or so, and most of them have been, or I can't say most of them, but a lot of them have been coaches, and I get positive emails at least a few times a month that are that it's as you said, hopefully kind of changing the best email I got was he said, it was great to find a book where they didn't spend 3 pages talking about the difference between an overlap, an interlock, and a baseball grip.
Yeah. There you go. Times are changing. I mean, you got to keep up. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job, and keep up the great work. And I just want to thank you for all your contributions to myself, golf instruction, and in my staff. I know Robbie and Seth are big fans of your work as well. So you're putting the great stuff out there, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's those type of comments that keep me motivated to do it. So.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and we will catch up soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Jason.
What's up, everyone? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you go. First, big thank you to Tyler Ferrell for coming on the show and sharing such great information on teaching, coaching, and some valuable life lessons on personal development. That was just an outstanding conversation. Please reach out to Tyler on the Twitter @GolfSmartTweets and say thank you and ask him any questions that you have. Also, visit his website at golfsmartacademy.com and subscribe. I'm telling you, it's one of the best information places that you could go, especially as a young coach looking to get better and improve their skills at coaching and teaching. So definitely do that. Also, tweet me your biggest takeaway that you found from Tyler in our conversation. You can reach out to me on Twitter @GolfGuruTV and on Instagram at the same handle. Also, check out my website at www.golfgurutv.net, where you can find lots of videos, articles, and more information on my teaching and coaching. Guys, thank you so much for the downloads and subscriptions. I'm just overwhelmed at the response of the podcast and really enjoying doing it. But I want to hear from you. Give me some feedback. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram. Let me know if I can answer any questions for you. If there are any guests that you want me to reach out to have on. Trying to make it better, man. Just trying to do my thing. So also, thank you so much to Zach Mullet, a.k.a. Cutta Beats, for my new music for the intro and the outro. I appreciate it. And as I always leave you with the infamous Jim Rohn quote, study, practice, teach, and then pass it on. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for listening.